you this, and be 100% honest, and I know some of you chicks in here are going to say this, having a husband or wife who is economically successful is important. Raise your hand if you see that in somebody in your future, that your spouse needs to be economically and educationally impressive. Why is that? Industrialization. We see each other now as having skills, right? What is important now isn't, are you a good person? Don't people give up relationships? Well, they're an okay person, but they make a lot of money, and I'm going to be very secure, and they're really good at filling the blank, right? Isn't that become important for a lot of people? I mean, not you, Joe. Yeah, but you're lucky the guy you're dating is really, really nice and crazy smart. Good job on that. All right? This is because we see each other differently. Please understand that this is part of industrialization. You won't see on a test, but, immigration, another social result. Immigration is going to account for a huge population increase, and this is going to change society also. Because of industrialization, we get the Know-Nothing Party. Does that make sense? Because the Know-Nothing Party is anti-immigrant. Why are immigrants coming over to America?
Jobs.
Because there are jobs. Now, yeah, the potatoes weren't around, but they're coming to America because there are jobs. If America didn't have jobs and the potato famine happened, where would the Irish people go?
England.
Somewhere with jobs. Well, they wouldn't lower themselves to go to England. But somewhere with jobs, right? So America having jobs, the industry is going to change society in terms of our religion, right? Industrialization brings a lot more Catholics here. It brings Lutherans here. It brings Jewish people here in the later 19th or 20th century. It's all economic based, right? And then you get all the political ramifications because of it. Foreign commerce. What do you think is going to be our biggest export by far? I'm sorry, you had a question. Go ahead.
Is there a correlation between women going to work and then children being forced to work?
Well, what's going to happen, because we'll talk about child labor. I'm glad you brought that up. What is child labor? When little kids are working, right? Why is it that child labor was becoming such a big issue? It didn't really change until the 20th century. But kids were working at a very young age. I mean, you're talking about, in some factories, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids are working 10 or 15 hours a day. Why? Because their wages were so depressed that for the family to survive, people had to work, right? And that changes the family structure too, right? Kids become less about nurturing and becomes more about survival, right? Kids also become more of an economic burden. On farms, kids become helpful, right? In factories, that's why what happens to the amount of kids being born with urbanization?
Goes down.
It begins to be lower. And what happens to the age of marriage? It goes up. Why would the age of marriage go up? Because women didn't have to get married so early, right? So that's an independence issue too. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I was wondering, like you mentioned, farmhands and stuff like that. If you had more children, then you would have more hands on the farm. But it was kind of a so-so problem in the cities because there was a depression and the fact that if you had more workers, then you could have more wages.
Yeah, but then you had to feed those people. Okay, let's talk about foreign commerce. 50% of all exports were cotton. Half of American exports were cotton. What's bad about that?
It's unsustainable. If cotton goes away.
Yeah, right. If you put all your eggs into the cotton basket, if the cotton market becomes flooded and the prices go down, that's an issue. Also, think about this. America becomes, this is also a social issue, America, even Northerners, are addicted to slavery. How are Northerners addicted to slavery? Because they get their cotton from the South. And they get cheap cotton from the South. What one reason why the cotton is so cheap? Because the labor is free, right? And so, isn't the North and the textile mills partly responsible for slavery? Much like all of us are partly responsible for child labor around the world. Why are we partly responsible for child labor around the world? Because we buy the cheap crap by some 6-year-old in China working with just his teeth, right? That hurt your feelings?
He goes, because we wear shoes.
Because we wear, I'll guarantee that there are very few of us in here who have an American-made shirt on.
Duncan.
Except Duncan. Duncan Adams, it's all American-made for Duncan. He only wears American-made stuff. You can check later, but I'll guarantee your Anderson County archery shirt was produced in Honduras or something like that, right? It was screen printed down the street, but it was made in some third world country. And I bet it wasn't all, right, well-paid 26-year-old people who were working there. And that's the reality of it, and we're just as guilty, all right? In terms of communication, actually the first transatlantic cable was set down in 1866. I'm sorry, 1858.
Didn't they just cut that down a little bit?
It was from Newfoundland to Ireland. They actually met in the middle. They laid cable down at the bottom so they can actually do messages overseas, like telegraph stuff overseas. It's pretty amazing. They went from telegraph from Baltimore to Washington in 1844, and only 14 years later are laying this stuff down overseas. That's pretty amazing.
That is still there.
Yeah, actually the bottom of the ocean has, I mean not all the ocean, but there are routes to the ocean that has tons of cable laid down. It's like a big giant, you have like the can with a string. It's like a big giant can in, America, and a big giant can in Europe, and string it in. And lastly, I will talk about the Pony Express, which is cool in theory. Pony Express only lasted, like I said, about 18 months. It was from Missouri all the way to Sacramento. And this will not be on the test, but just, for your American Jeopardy, self. From every 10 miles, there was an outpost. Why would they have it every 10 miles?
Horses don't get
More
tired.
horses.
Because the horses would get tired running. I mean, obviously they weren't sprinting for 10 miles, right? But the horses can run pretty fast for 10 miles, and you can carry something across the west, right? This is, once railroads became more popular out west, they just used railroads, right? Once the Transcontinental Railroad was built, but that wasn't until 1869, right? So this is how we get stuff across. It was highly dangerous. It's very American, right? These rugged guys getting these packages and going across the plains and dodging Native American arrows and, jumping over herding cattle who are coming after you, and buffalo are left and right and everything. Right? It's pretty awesome in theory. And it's 18 months and only missed one trip. Only one person didn't get from one post to the next by not going. But it's pretty awesome. It's very American, but like most things in America, history that are really cool is oftentimes exaggerated because it's so awesome, right? Okay. All right. We have about 5-6 minutes left. Get your essays out. Just stop the thing, please. And let's talk about